In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Battlemage build. This is a level 100 version of the Enchanted Knight, so if you like the playstyle of that build, then watch on to see how you can play it at higher levels. As I mentioned in previous videos, you can sort of go two directions when playing a melee sorcerer in this game. You can either lean into the Carian sword sorceries, which what we're doing in this video, or you can lean into other spells and using like a magic type weapon, which is more what I consider a spellblade type build. So in this video, we're going to be showcasing how to use the Carian sword sorceries effectively. So the first thing let's talk about is the equipment for the build. The staff that you want for this build is the Carian Glintstone staff. The reason for this is that it boosts Carian sword sorcery damage. The damage boost is significant enough that it actually outperforms Azur's Glintstone staff, which speeds up the rate at which you cast spells in exchange for costing more FP. So if you were thinking, oh, I'll slice faster and I'll do more damage per second, you can actually test this out on like a tough enemy, a scenario where you would spam Carian Slicer, and you'll find out that you actually kill things faster with Carian Glintstone staff than Azur's Glintstone staff, even though you're attacking faster. This is also true if you're just casting like Glintstone Pebble out on the landscape. You'll actually deal more damage with the Carian staff over the Azur staff in most scenarios, even though you can cast the Azur staff faster. But because the cost of FP is higher per cast, you'll generally find that if you're spamming it into a tough enemy, you'll actually run out of FP sometimes. Well, you won't with the Carian staff, and you'll actually end up killing it faster with the Carian staff. The other option is Lusat's Glintstone staff, which increases the damage you deal, but increases the FP cost substantially. And frankly, FP management is such a huge part of being a mage. I don't think it outweighs using the Carian staff, so I highly recommend using the Carian staff in just about every scenario. So what's really great about the Jellyfish shield is that its buff increases your damage by 20% for 30 seconds for 9 FP. So instead of getting a big damage buff for a short period of time, you're getting a small damage buff over a long period of time, and you can block at the same time, which is fantastic. Because a lot of times when you're playing as a mage, you don't need burst damage as much as you need a little bit more damage to finish off one target and one spell cast. The 20% I find is about right in most cases, and since it lasts longer, you don't have to recast it as often, and again, as I mentioned, you can block with that shield, and it's a great shield that only weighs 8, which is pretty light, and it has 50 guard boost, which is pretty great. So as you're roaming around on the landscape, you can use your spells and Carian Slicer with the buff from that shield and still do fantastic damage, and have more of a tanky feel to your character as you can block when you need to. Note that as you upgrade the shield, the guard boost on it will go up. I think it maxes out at 55, so you definitely want to upgrade that over time. It uses Somber Stones, which is great, so that you gain more guard boost with your blocks. It's not a ton, but every little bit helps. Now, when it comes to armor, the first thing I want to talk about is the helmet. I use the Haima Glintstone Crown for this, and it's because it gives 2 points to strength and 2 points to intelligence. You need 20 strength in order to use the shield for this build, so that strength is not wasted, and extra intelligence helps your damage and meet the requirements for spells. The downside is that you lose 10% FP. But at this point of the game, having about 25 mind, you only lose about 12 FP. So that's not bad. That's actually just 2 points of mind, and you get that back at this point. So you're gaining 4 stats in exchange for basically 2 points of mind. So that's actually a net plus. Probably as you go higher into the game, it won't be worth it. But at this point, it's fantastic. Beyond that, the armor that you wear is really up to you. You're not going to be wearing very heavy armor with this build because you do have quite a little bit heavy of a shield, and you have to carry 2 weapons in your right hand most of the time, although we're trying to make them as light as possible. So you're going to wear a light to medium-ish armor most of the time. Just make sure that you can medium roll. The 4 talismans I use for this build are Graven School Talisman, Green Turtle Talisman, the Radagon Icon, and Stargazer Heirloom. Graven School Talisman, pretty self-explanatory, just boost your sorcery damage. That's going to apply to all your sorceries, so that's good. The Green Turtle Talisman helps you regenerate stamina faster. You swing Carian Slicer really fast and just chew through your stamina. You'll also be blocking with this build. So you want to regain your stamina quickly so you can spam spells like Carian Slicer and Glintstone Pebble more frequently. Radagon Icon increases the speed at which you cast. This is going to help you get Carian Slicer out faster and Glintstone Pebble out faster when you're casting that and spamming those. So that's good, and it'll also make like your Loretta's Great Bow charge up faster and stuff like that. So that's just fantastic. And Stargazer Heirloom just increases your intelligence by 5. You want to get as much damage out of this build as you possibly can, so you melt things as quickly as possible when you're in melee range. Some other options for this build are the Ritual Sword Talisman. This increases your total damage by 10%, including spells, but the issue is that you have to be at full health. This is far better on a pure mage at this point in game that'll stay back and will be less likely to get hit than one that's going into melee range, meleeing and swinging really, kind of going balls to the wall with your Carian Slicer. I find that it's very hard to maintain this buff playing this build, but it's an option for you nonetheless. Another option for this build is the Magic Scorpion Charm. This increases your magic damage by about 10 to 12% in exchange for losing about 10% resistances. You're already kind of squishy with this build because your armor's not the best because you're not really putting points into endurance. So I don't recommend it, but if you want to go really, really glass cannon and crank out as much damage as you can and you're an expert dodge roller or something, then you can use this one as well. Also, I want to note that I tested out the Winged Sword insignia, and it actually does work with this spell, but by the time you hit enough times to trigger the bonus to damage, you pretty much will either have to roll away in 99% of scenarios, or you'll probably kill your target in 1 or 2 hits more anyway. So I don't recommend using it with this build. This build is extremely flexible, which I really like, and generally the way it works is that you'll use Glintstone Pebble to pick off things that are just very difficult to melee. Either the moveset's erratic, or you can't get to it because it's in a different level, like it's above you or below you, and that gives you ranged flexibility, which is fantastic. You're going to use Carian Slicer as your bread and butter. It's actually cheaper than Glintstone Pebble, so when you're attacking, you're going to save FP by using it when you can. You can use your shield to block as you move up and then attack with it, which is good. Carian Greatsword is there for AoE situations and on horseback. Probably not going to use this that often, but it is very nice to have when you're on horseback specifically. Carian Piercer is very situational as well. It's very good against invading NPC phantoms, and it's good against some really aggressive enemies that keep charging at you because it has incredible range, and it can hit through like pillars and walls and stuff sometimes if you position yourself properly. So sometimes you can get an enemy between you and the pillar, and then you can stab through that pillar with it to deal damage. And the last spell I use with this build is Loretta's Great Bow. This is fantastic for getting really, really long range. The damage is excellent as well. It's just longer than Glintstone Pebble, so there's some scenarios where you can't hit enemies with Glintstone Pebble that you need this. And it works really well when you want to get the drop on a difficult enemy and you want to rip off a chunk of their health before you start engaging them in melee as well. So you might want to use it in those scenarios even if you're not very far away. So as you make your way through levels and bosses and stuff, you'll kind of switch around what spells you're using depending on the situation. And that's why I really like this build, because it's extremely flexible. And if you like playing in melee with magic, then this is a really fun build to try. When it comes to the stats for this build, I have 30 Vigor, 25 Mind, 15 Endurance, 20 Strength, 14 Dexterity, 61 Intelligence, 14 Faith, and 9 Arcane. The 30 Vigor is there to give you health because you're going to be in melee range and you want to be able to take a couple hits. You're also going to be wearing lighter to medium armor, so you're not going to shrug off as much damage, and that's going to help keep you alive so you can take a potion. When it comes to Mind, I have at least 25 for a couple reasons. First, if you're using the helmet that I'm using and you're losing out on FP, you need to be able to get at least 6 points per FP to make this worth it. So that's number one. Number two is you are using spells like 99% of the time, maybe even 100% of the time. So you definitely don't want to run out of FP while you're mid-level and then find yourself trying to bash things with your shield. The endurance is simply there because you're using a heavy shield and you want to be able to use some armor that's not the lightest armor in the game. So you can add endurance here if you want to use heavier armor, but you don't need it. 20 strength and 14 dexterity are there to meet the requirements of the shield. You really don't need any more than this. And again, we only have 18 points here, and the helmet is giving us 2 of those points, so you only need to put 18 points in strength. We have really high intelligence here. Not only have we dumped tons of points into it, but we also have a lot of points from our helmet. We have a point from the Stargazer Heirloom that gives 5 more points into intelligence. And the reason for that, again, is you absolutely want to melt things as quickly as possible. It's not about how fast you can swing, although that's good. It's about how much damage you do per swing. The more damage you do per swing, the faster things die. I like 60 intelligence at this point, but you can get away with less if you want, but I wouldn't go too much less. And if you take points out of intelligence, consider putting them into Mind so that you have more FP to play around with. And lastly, the Faith is there because of the class I picked. It's not the ideal class for this build. You don't need any Faith or Arcane at all for this build, so make sure there, isn't any point put in there by you. Additionally, one final tip before I wrap up this video is you can use the Magic Shrouding Cracked tier in your Flask of Wondrous Physique to increase your magic damage by 20% for 3 minutes. This is really good before going into boss fights because if you're going for the blender strategy and you just want to melt them with your Carian Slicer, getting that damage up even higher is just going to help melt them even faster. That wraps up the Battlemage build video. I'm not sure which build I'm going to do next. I have a few ideas for some builds, so stay tuned to see what we do.